March 6, 2006, you officially turned 150 years old. Your name, Chickaming, is an Indian word meaning the edge of a great expanse. The tribe who named you had to be thinking of your greatest bounty, Lake Michigan. They were right. You're abundantly fertile because you dwell in Lake Michigan's lush valley. Proud and strong because of your early settlers, whose names include Ames, Wilkinson, Hibbards, Sawyer, Knotts, and Glavin. Congratulations, Chickaming. You've nurtured 4 distinct communities that sparkle like jewels on Michigan's necklace. Union Pier, known for family resorts and sumptuous beaches. Lakeside, with its elegant lakeside mansions. Harbert, whose beauty inspired Carl Sandburg, its most famous citizen. Sawyer, with its towering Warren Dunes, the most popular state park in Michigan. You've gifted us with 4 spirited communities, each with a mind of its own, and a line of admirers spanning across the heartland. The development of the railroads brought transportation for your farmers' crops and eager guests to holiday resorts. The Pere Marquette stations in Harbert and Sawyer were depots serving agriculture. In Union Pier and Lakeside, trains brought city people longing for the feel of sand between their toes and your intoxicating country air. You are luxuriant in soft sandy beaches, tall trees that reach to the sky, lush orchards sweet with fruit, and prize-winning vineyards whose grapes sparkle into wine. Listen to some sterling Chickaming memories from people who live and work here.
I was born in Union Pier. My grandparents, Joseph Konvalinka, came to Union Pier in 1919 and bought an 80-acre farm, of which in 1923 my parents received some part of that land to build a home on. And I was born in that home. I was born at home, and it still stands today. We went to school in Union Pier. The old wooden Union Pier school building was moved in 1928 to the corner of Town Line Road and Community Hall Road today. It became the Vavra store, and it was the store to go to, and later became, as it is now, a shop for the Sweet Haven Resort. Union Pier in the 20s and 30s was a resort area of Czechoslovakian people and Jewish people, and there were many resorts. There was the Vavra Resort, there was Prussia Resort, bars on the east side of the highway, and on the other side of the highway by the lake we had the Gordon Beach Hotel, the Korensky Hotel, and Lakeview Hotel, many others. Union Pier was a place where the people from Chicago started to come in the 20s and 30s because of the lake. Just like today, people love the beach. There were not any automobiles in the 20s, and they came to the train station. Union Pier had a train depot, and that was a Pere Marquette Railroad, of which they had about 5 daily stops from Chicago with people coming into Union Pier. There would be wagons there with horses to come pick the people up. Across the street from the train station was the Corrigan store, and it may have been somebody else's before Corrigan's, I'm not sure, but then the post office went in one corner of it, of which was my first job out of high school. I worked at the post office for 1.5 years. There was also, then it became the Novacek store, and then it was also a hardware store, and I believe the last thing that was in it for a long time was Capers Dance Hall, where everybody went from the whole area. It was quite a jumping place in the 60s with Johnny Jackson's band playing, and just a great place. Today it's a Kacheras Union House restaurant. So it's really kept up, it's still there. And most of the families were out from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and the fathers would come out on weekends, and when they did, they all came to Kopac's to buy their kids' toys and clothes, and there were times when we would be so crowded, Mr. Kopak would have to lock the door and let people in as people went out, because we just couldn't have anybody else in there. And it was just a great time to be young at that time. I was only 14 when I started to work there, so it was young. And there was a time, a few years later, there was a building in between the bakery and Kopac's that was Captain Dan's fish store. And that building is not there anymore, but it was quite a fish store. Then if you go across the street, the auto shop that's now Mike Schuler's was a gas station that was built in the 30s, and it was built by my Uncle Charlie Konvalinka. Then the other place that I would like to mention is the community building, which was the new brick schoolhouse that was built in 1928. And that is where most of the Union Pier activities took place. We had weddings there, we had showers there, we had dances. The bands came from Chicago. We had Czech bands from Chicago and all different kinds of bands from this big city. And the Sunshine Club was the one that you remember when you were a child, because they had all these parties for the kids. One of the interesting things about Union Pier was the beginning of it, when the Goodwin and the Gowdy families started to do some development there in Union Pier by building a 600-foot pier out into the water at Berrien Street. And they also had built a railroad going back across the land to bring the trees for lumber. And they brought them down to that pier, and they also built a boat on the beach to carry that lumber. They built it on the beach and then rolled it into the water on logs to get it into the water. And that boat would carry that lumber to Chicago. And I'm sure there were other boats that came from Chicago to Union Pier to pick up lumber. But that was one of the first trades in Union Pier, was the lumber industry. And some of those piers are still there. And if the water level goes down, you can see those piers.
This is Auntie Ellen, and she's lived in the area, was born and raised in the area her entire 96 years. She was born in a farm about 2 miles from Union Pier, and they had a lot of fruit on this farm. And in later years, they bought a grocery store from Corrigan's, I think it was, yeah, in Union Pier. And they delivered, they had a milk route. They delivered to a lot of the cottages that were in Union Pier years ago. And they also sold a lot of the stuff that they grew there.
Chickens and all
Yeah.
kinds.
And then there was a post office that was also connected to the store. And part of the family worked in that capacity also. And they went and delivered door-to-door milk in those days. It was bottles, there was no cartons. And her sister, who was my mother, worked in the store. Her mother worked in the store. And basically all members of the family worked in the grocery store. And then they sold, there was a fire that kind of gutted the store. It was a general store that had everything in it, kind of like your Walmarts today, only on a lot smaller scale.
My understanding about Elm Valley Road is that originally they moved from Chicago over to the farm and purchased the farm in the early 1900s. At that point, the road, I believe, only went up to the farm, and it was dirt, and coming up across the bridge from over Glean River, it was horse and buggy and mud all the time. And to get to the Elm Valley Road put in, my great-grandfather gave up part of his property in which Elm Valley goes through. Later on, they had had a working farm with cows and pigs and fruit. I'd say somewhere to 30 to 40 acres of apple trees. Worked the farm for quite some time. Eventually they got too old to work the farm, and then they worked quite a large, probably a 2-acre garden next to the house into their late 80s and early 90s.
They owned the grocery store and the post office adjourning. The mail came to Union Pier via the train, which the train tracks were right across Red Arrow Highway, and they were actually dropped on a hook. The bag of mail was dropped on a hook, and any outgoing mail then they also picked up from this hook. So that's how the mail got to Union Pier years ago. That also. And so everybody in the family took part in the store or the delivery of everything. Yeah.
I am a direct descendant of several early Chickaming Township families, the Wilkinsons, the Disbros, and the Robinsons. My great-great-grandfather, John Wesley Wilkinson, came to Chickaming Township in 1854 from Virginia and settled here with his family. He built a trading post and a sawmill on what is now the corners of Pier Street and Lakeshore Road, and had a ship called the Enterprise, which took lumber across the lake to Chicago and brought back supplies for the trading post. After the railroad came through Chickaming in 1869, the center of the village, which was then called Wilkinson, moved up to what is now downtown Lakeside. And the building was later moved to its present location at 15300 Red Arrow Highway in Lakeside. I grew up on Warren Woods Road in one of the old Disbro Robinson homesteads, and I went to school at the Lakeside Grade School, which was on Lakeside Road. That grade school is no longer there. It was torn down some years ago, and the land became part of the Chickaming Country Club. But at that time, it was a wonderful little school with 3 rooms, 3 classes per room, and I have many fond memories of that little Lakeside Grade School. When we graduated from the 8th grade, we had the choice of going to New Buffalo or Three Oaks High Schools, and I chose New Buffalo. Another family bit of history that I enjoy thinking about was that my great uncle, Clarence Wilkinson, laid out the Chickaming Country Club golf course in about 1913 along along with Paul Warren, in what was then one of the Wilkinson cornfields. They first called it, I believe, the Lakeside Golf Club, but later it became the Chickaming Country Club. In 1986, my husband and I were able to buy the old trading post back out of foreclosure from the bank that by that time owned it, and we moved there. We now live there in the old living quarters, much expanded, and we also established the Wilkinson Heritage Museum in one room of the old trading post. And that little museum tells the history of Lakeside and Chickaming Township. Chickaming became a separate township in around 1856. Originally, all of Chickaming, Three Oaks, was included in what was then known as New Buffalo Township. Another of my memories about that Chickaming Country Club is that my husband and I had our wedding dinner there when we were married in 1954. By that time, the clubhouse, which is called the Shakespeare House, had been built many years before, and that was actually a building that was built for a great exposition in Chicago, then disassembled, brought to Lakeside in, I believe, railroad cars, and reassembled. And that's how it became the Shakespeare House and the Chickaming Country Club.
The old fire barn was just a barn that someone built years ago to store stuff in, and then when they got their first fire truck in 1928, they kept it in there was a garage in Lakeside. They kept it there for 2 years. Then they got arrangements to put it in this barn. It was a huge barn, and that's where they kept it, the old truck, and it was a 1928 Chevy with chemical tanks on it until they built the new fire station that was right next to the Chickaming Township Hall.
Gibson's store was located on the corner of Lakeside and Pierce Street, right smack in downtown Lakeside. When he was a partner with Emery, I think it was Emery Glidden, who
Right.
owned this store, and then Liberty William joined with him. A few years after that, Mr. Glidden dropped out, and Gibson's then built a new store directly across the street, and it was up in 1928, I think it was.
That's
So
right.
we had a brand new store, and it's still there today. The store was opened until 1964. We closed in 1964. Father had died. My sister Marilyn was running the store at that time, and it was just getting to be a little too much. And with all the big chain stores and groceries that were around, it was just not a profitable venture. So we closed the store and sold the building to the Lakeside Methodist Church, and they used it for their education building, held classes there, varying sorts. And subsequently, the church sold the building to, I think the Silver Crane moved in there.
Yes, Silver Crane was
Silver
first.
Crane was a kind of a art and gift shop, and it was there for a few years, and then they sold it again, and it's now turned into Lovell and White's furniture store. John St. Clair Gibson was very instrumental in bringing the post office to Lakeside. He was the first postmaster, and the post office was located in his house at the beginning. Now his house is located right next to where the Lakeside Methodist Church is now. The post office was in his house for a number of years, and then it moved into the Glidden store and occupied space in the Glidden store for a good number of years. The post office then moved into the new building on the corner of Lakeside and Pierce Street. It was in that store for a good number of years, and then Maud Parham, who was the postmistress at the time, bought the old John St. Clair Gibson house and moved the post office back to where it originally began. then in about 1960, I believe it was, they built a new building, and the post office then moved into its new building and had a big dedication ceremony. There were a group of summer residents who planted 4 maple trees along the west side of Lakeside Road in the downtown area. And they did this in